in general, I don't like most anybody, you know, but I like individuals.
David Allan Coe was never like the rest. He lived fast, played louder, and never followed the rules. But what happened after the spotlight faded is something few people talk about, and for good reason. There's more to his story than outlaw songs and wild headlines. Join us as we uncover the tragic ending of David Allan Coe and why it's so disturbing. Born to break laws. David Allan Coe's story begins far from the bright lights of country music stages. He was born on September 6, 1939, in Akron, Ohio, a tough working-class city where life wasn't easy for anyone, especially a young boy like Coe. From the start, his life was filled with hardship. His family situation was unstable, and he never had the kind of support or structure that most kids need growing up. The streets of Akron weren't gentle, and neither was his childhood. Even as a kid, Coe didn't follow the rules. He was rebellious, restless, and angry. By the time he was just 9 years old, he was already in trouble with the law. That year, he was sent to a reform school, a place meant to help troubled youth straighten out. But it didn't help Coe. If anything, it made things worse. Reform schools in the 1940s and 50s were often harsh, punishing places, and Coe didn't respond well to that kind of environment. Instead of changing his behavior, he became more defiant. That early trip to reform school started what would become a long and painful pattern in his life. Throughout his teenage years, Coe continued to run into trouble. He was in and out of juvenile detention centers more than once. He didn't fit in anywhere. Authority figures, teachers, police, and judges didn't know what to do with him, and Coe didn't care what they thought. He was already beginning to see himself as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the world around him. The legal system labeled him a delinquent, but to Coe, he was just being true to himself, no matter what it cost. As he got older, the consequences got more serious. In his late teens and early 20s, he graduated from juvenile facilities to adult prisons. These weren't minimum security jails. They were high-security, maximum-level institutions with dangerous inmates and harsh conditions. Coe spent years behind bars, serving time for crimes like robbery and auto theft. While he never revealed every detail of his criminal past, it's clear that those years had a lasting effect on him. And it was inside one of those prison cells that David Allan Coe met someone who would change everything. Songs behind bars. While many people try to forget their time in prison, for David Allan Coe, it was where his music was born. The years he spent behind bars were hard and unforgiving, but they also gave him something he didn't have before, a way to express his pain. Music became his escape from a life that felt broken beyond repair. In a place full of anger, violence, and hopelessness, Coe found a small spark of something different. That spark would eventually turn into his life's purpose. Prison wasn't new to Coe by the time he reached his 20s. He had already been in and out of juvenile detention centers as a teenager. But now, as an adult, the stakes were higher. He was serving real time in high-security prisons, places meant for the most dangerous inmates. The world inside was cold and strict. There was little freedom and even less kindness. But Coe wasn't the kind of person to give up. He found a way to survive, and that way was through music. He started by singing in the prison yard, in his cell, or anywhere someone would listen. His voice was raw, emotional, and filled with experience. He didn't just sing to pass the time. He sang to be heard. Slowly, other inmates began to notice. So did a few musicians who had either visited the prison or spent time inside themselves. One of the most important people Coe met during this period was the legendary blues singer Screamin' Jay Hawkins. Screamin' Jay was known for his loud voice, wild performances, and unforgettable hit, "I Put a Spell on You." But behind all the drama, He had a good ear for talent. When he heard Coe sing, he told him he had something special. Hawkins encouraged Coe to write down his life story and turn it into songs. He saw that Coe had lived through things most people never would, and that his pain and anger could be turned into powerful music. Coe took that advice seriously. From that point on, Coe began writing every day. He filled pages with lyrics, thoughts, and stories from his past. He didn't hold anything back. He wrote about prison life, street fights, loneliness, and betrayal. His songs weren't made-up stories. They were real. His music became a way of telling the truth about his life, even if it was ugly or painful. And when he finally walked out of prison in 1967, that's exactly where he went. From inmate to Nashville reject. When David Allan Coe was released from prison in 1967, he didn't have much. No home, no money, and no real plan. But he had a guitar, a voice full of pain and truth, and one big dream: to make it in country music. He believed his life story and his songs were powerful enough to break through. And he knew there was only one place where that could happen: Nashville, Tennessee. As soon as he got out, Coe headed straight to Music City. But Nashville, in the late 1960s, wasn't very welcoming to someone like him. The industry was polished and professional, full of clean-cut stars who played by the rules. Coe didn't fit in. He didn't look the part. And he definitely didn't sound like anyone on the radio. Still, he refused to give up. With nowhere to live, Coe slept in a black hearse parked outside the Ryman Auditorium, the very building known as the Mother Church of Country Music. It was a strange sight. A long-haired ex-con living in a funeral car just steps away from where country legends were performing. But Coe didn't care how it looked. He was determined to be heard. But the music business didn't know what to do with him. His rough voice, honest lyrics, and outlaw image didn't match the smooth, controlled sound they were putting on the radio. He was told no again and again. Record labels passed on him. Producers didn't want to take the risk. Coe was too real, too raw, and far too unpredictable for the country music scene at the time. That finally changed when Shelby Singleton, a smart and bold record producer, heard Coe's music. Singleton was known for taking chances on unique talent. When he listened to Coe, he saw something that others didn't: a truth-teller, a man who had lived the life he sang about. Singleton signed him to Plantation Records, giving Coe his first real shot. In 1970, they released Coe's debut album, Penitentiary Blues. The album was unlike anything Nashville had heard before. It was dark, gritty, and brutally honest. Coe didn't hold anything back. He sang about prison violence, loneliness, and survival. The songs were full of pain, rage, and defiance. They weren't pretty, and they weren't safe, but they were real. The album shocked many in the industry. Some were offended, others were amazed. Either way, people were finally talking about David Allan Coe. And Coe wasn't about to stop there. He had more stories to tell and bigger goals to chase. Even though David Allan Coe had released Penitentiary Blues in 1970, it didn't launch him into stardom. The album was powerful, raw, and real, but it was too dark and too different for mainstream country radio at the time. Still, it got people talking, and most importantly, it proved that Coe had something special. Even if he wasn't getting airplay as a performer, Nashville was starting to notice his talent as a songwriter. Coe kept writing day and night. He wrote about love, heartbreak, struggle, freedom, and pain. His songs didn't sound like anyone else's. They came from real experience, sometimes beautiful, often brutal. What set him apart was how deeply emotional and honest his lyrics were. He didn't just write about feelings, he lived them. That kind of songwriting caught the attention of some of Nashville's biggest names. In 1973, everything changed for Coe when one of his songs, "Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone," was recorded by teenage country sensation Tanya Tucker. At the time, Tucker was already a rising star, known for her mature voice and fearless delivery, even though she was just 15 years old. Coe's song was a bold choice. It was emotional, poetic, and full of deep questions about love and loyalty. For Coe, the success was a major breakthrough. Suddenly, people all over the industry knew his name. He had written a #1 hit. His lyrics were being sung on the radio. His words were reaching millions. But there was one big problem. It wasn't his voice singing them. Even with this success, Coe was still living in the shadows. The spotlight was on Tucker, not on the man who had written the song. While he was proud of the hit, the feeling of being left behind started to grow. He didn't just want to be a songwriter for others. He wanted to be on stage, holding the mic, singing his own words. He had stories that only he could tell the right way. The frustration started to build. And in just a couple of years, that's exactly what he would do, on his own terms, becoming the Outlaw frontman. After years of writing songs for others and living on the fringes of Nashville, David Allan Coe finally got a chance to step into the spotlight himself. In the mid-1970s, he signed a deal with Columbia Records, one of the most powerful labels in country music at the time. This was the big break he had been working toward since the day he got out of prison. But Coe wasn't about to change his sound or style to fit in. He was going to do things his way, unfiltered, honest, and bold. In 1975, Coe released an album called Once Upon a Rhyme. This record showed a different side of him. While his earlier music had focused mostly on dark themes like prison life and survival, this album blended humor, heartbreak, and rebellion. It was still gritty, but it had a little more polish, and it gave fans a chance to hear the full range of his talent. The standout song from that album was "You Never Even Called Me By My Name." It wasn't written by Coe. Songwriters Steve Goodman and John Prine actually penned it, but Coe made it his own. The song starts off as a straightforward country ballad, but by the end, it turns into something else entirely. Coe added a final verse that pokes fun at the cliches of country music, mentioning trucks, trains, prison, mama, and drinking, the typical topics you'd find in a classic country hit. That final verse turned the song into a kind of inside joke between Coe and his listeners. It was funny, clever, and a little rebellious. It didn't take itself too seriously, and fans loved that. The song reached the top 10 on the Billboard Country chart, and for many, it was their first introduction to David Allan Coe as a performer, not just a songwriter. Even though the song was a hit, Coe was still considered too edgy for mainstream country radio. His rough background, unpredictable style, and outspoken personality made some industry leaders nervous. He didn't fit into the clean-cut image Nashville wanted to promote. But Coe didn't care. He wasn't chasing radio play. He was building something different, a cult following of fans who loved his honesty and attitude. That same year, Coe appeared in the legendary music documentary Heart-Worn Highways. The film captured the rising outlaw country movement and featured artists like Waylon Jennings, Townes Van Zandt, Guy Clark, and Steve Earle. Coe stood out, even among this rebellious crowd. He didn't just talk the outlaw talk, he had lived it. Viewers saw him as the real deal, someone whose music came from actual pain and hard experience. After proving himself as a songwriter and scoring a hit, David Allan Coe doubled down on his outlaw image. But instead of blending in with other country singers, he went in the opposite direction. He created something that no one in Nashville had seen before. A bold, strange, and unforgettable stage persona that blurred the line between performer and character. This is when he became known as the mysterious Rhinestone Cowboy. The inspiration came partly from country star Mel Tillis, who was known for wearing bright rhinestone suits on stage. Coe admired the flashy style, but he wanted to take it even further. He didn't just want to look different. He wanted to be different. So Coe created a new identity for himself, one that mixed glam and grit in a way no one had ever attempted in country music. He began performing in full rhinestone-covered suits, complete with a black mask similar to the one worn by the Lone Ranger. The mask was a mystery to fans and critics alike. Some thought it was a gimmick, while others believed it represented something deeper, maybe his past, maybe his defiance, or maybe just his refusal to be like anyone else. Coe never fully explained it, and that only added to his mystique. And soon, Coe would take things even further, testing just how far the Outlaw label could go. Banned and unapologetic. By the mid-1970s, David Allan Coe had already carved out a space for himself as a true outlaw in country music. But in 1976, he took that identity even further with the release of LongHaired Redneck. This song wasn't just another track, it was a personal anthem. In it, Coe sang about being caught between two worlds, too country for the rock crowd and too wild for the traditional country scene. He described himself as someone who didn't fit in anywhere, and he was proud of it. LongHaired Redneck became a defining song for Coe. It spelled out everything he stood for: rebellion, independence, and honesty. It told the world that he wasn't going to clean up his act or follow any rules. The song got some radio play, but more importantly, it connected deeply with fans who also felt like outsiders. It made clear that Coe wasn't just part of the outlaw country movement. He embodied it. But that was only the beginning. Not long after, Coe went into much darker territory with two albums that pushed boundaries farther than most artists ever dared. The first was Nothing Sacred, followed by Underground Album. These records were not released through major labels or sold in regular record stores. They were distributed independently, often through biker magazines or underground music catalogs. The content of these albums was extremely controversial. The songs were filled with explicit language, graphic sexual themes, and offensive material. Some of the lyrics included slurs and disturbing references that shocked even his most loyal fans. Mainstream critics and journalists called the albums vulgar, disgusting, and unforgivable. Coe was quickly accused of racism, misogyny, and homophobia. He denied those accusations, but the damage to his public image was done. Record stores refused to carry the albums. Radio stations wouldn't play them. Music journalists openly criticized him. Many in the industry cut ties with him completely. Even artists who had once supported him began to distance themselves. But Coe didn't back down, not even a little. He refused to apologize or explain. With the industry now watching him from a distance, Coe leaned even harder into his outsider status. And somehow, his career still wasn't done changing. Fame without fortune. David Allan Coe had the talent, the voice, and the songs. But when it came to the business side of things, everything didn't go as planned. Even as he was writing some of country music's most unforgettable hits, he was also living in chaos behind the scenes. Fame found him, but fortune didn't follow the way it should have. One of Coe's most well-known contributions to country music was the song "Take This Job and Shove It." He wrote it in the late 1970s, capturing the anger and frustration of the everyday working man. The lyrics were bold and direct, and they quickly struck a chord with people across the country. But Coe didn't record the song himself. Instead, it was recorded by fellow outlaw country singer Johnny Paycheck in 1977. Paycheck's version became a massive hit, shooting to #1 on the Billboard country chart and becoming an anthem for blue-collar workers. The song was played everywhere, from radio stations to factory floors, and it helped define the outlaw era of country music. But for Coe, the success was bittersweet. Even though he wrote the song, he wasn't the face or voice behind the hit. Paycheck got the fame and radio play, while Coe stayed in the background as the songwriter. Still, Coe kept writing and performing. In 1983, he released The Ride, a haunting and powerful song about a hitchhiker who's picked up by the ghost of Hank Williams. The track told a unique story, mixing country history with a touch of the supernatural. It became one of Coe's most beloved songs, showing his skill as both a storyteller and performer. The song reached the top 5 on the country charts, and for once, Coe was the one in the spotlight. A year later, in 1984, he followed up with She Used to Love Me a Lot, a heartbreaking ballad full of regret and sadness. The song was softer and more emotional than many of his other works, and it proved that Coe wasn't just a rebel. He could also connect with listeners on a deeply personal level. It became another radio success and reminded fans and critics alike of his range and depth as an artist. But despite all this musical success, Coe's personal life was a mess. He lived fast, spent money quickly, and didn't keep track of his finances. By 1984, it all caught up with him. Facing mounting debts, he was forced to file for bankruptcy. As part of the process, he had to sell the rights to all the songs he had written before that year, including his biggest hits. For just $225,000, his entire early catalog, including Take This Job and Shove It, was sold off. It was a devastating loss. Without those publishing rights, Coe no longer earned money from the songs that had made his name. Even after all that, Coe didn't give up. He kept playing live shows to survive, and soon that became the only thing keeping him afloat. Post-bankruptcy survival. After losing the rights to his early songs in 1984, David Allan Coe found himself in a difficult place. Without royalties from hits like Take This Job and Shove It, The Ride, and many others, he could no longer rely on past success to support himself. The publishing rights had been sold for just $200,000 to $25,000, far less than what the songs were truly worth, and that money was quickly gone. From that point on, Coe had to survive the only way he knew how, by hitting the road. Touring became Coe's lifeline. While many artists might slow down or step away from the spotlight after such a huge financial loss, Coe did the opposite. He began touring constantly, sometimes playing more than 200 shows a year. These weren't glamorous arena tours with big production budgets. Instead, Coe mostly performed in small clubs, dive bars, outdoor bike rallies, and fringe festivals, often in rough or remote areas. His crowds changed too. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Coe's fan base was mostly made up of bikers, outsiders, and rebel music fans, people who saw themselves in his outlaw spirit. Many of these fans weren't necessarily country radio listeners. They were drawn to Coe because he was raw, real, and had never backed down from being himself. He wasn't polished, and he didn't try to be. That's what made him stand out. Over time, this lifestyle took its toll. Coe became increasingly disconnected from mainstream country, both musically and socially. He was rarely mentioned in country press, and most major industry players kept their distance. But his cult following remained strong, and in some ways, it only grew. Fans respected his dedication and his refusal to sell out, even if it meant playing in smaller venues for less money. Coe had built his life around rebellion, and now the road was his only home. He may have lost the backing of the industry, but he still had a stage, and that was all he needed. But even after decades on tour, one more big moment was still waiting around the corner. The final curveball. Even after decades of being an outlaw in country music, David Allan Coe wasn't done surprising people. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, he made a move that almost no one saw coming. While most country artists his age were settling into legacy status or playing old hits on small tours, Coe teamed up with one of heavy metal's biggest names. Dimebag Darrell from the band Pantera. Together with Dimebag's brother Vinnie Paul, bassist Rex Brown, and Coe on vocals, they formed a supergroup called Rebel Meets Rebel. They started recording songs in the late 1990s, creating a sound that mixed country storytelling with heavy guitar riffs and metal energy. It was loud, gritty, and completely different from anything else at the time. Some songs had twang and steel guitar, while others had full-blown metal solos and shouted vocals. They recorded enough material for an entire album, but it wasn't released right away. In 2004, tragedy struck when Dimebag Darrell was shot and killed on stage during a performance in Ohio. The music world was stunned. After his death, the recordings became even more meaningful. In 2006, 2 years later, the album Rebel Meets Rebel was finally released. Around the same time, Coe also showed a more emotional side. He worked with Kid Rock, a rock and country crossover artist, on the song Single Father. It was a slow, heartfelt ballad about the struggles of raising a child alone. The song surprised many listeners, especially those who only knew Coe for his wild reputation. It reminded people that, beneath all the controversy and rebellion, Coe was still a powerful songwriter with deep emotional range. Even as the years passed, Coe kept doing what he had always done, breaking rules, following his own path, and making music that nobody else dared to make. And as time went on, Coe's story took yet another turn, this time into the world of legacy and reflection. The fall of Coe. By the mid-2000s, David Allan Coe's career was far from the spotlight, but he was still performing and refusing to give up. Time, however, was beginning to take its toll. Years of hard living, relentless touring, and public controversy had left him physically and mentally worn down. Health problems began to pile up, including respiratory issues and joint pain, which made long tours even harder. Still, Coe kept going. In 2006, he made a rare and powerful appearance in the music video for Johnny Cash's posthumous song, God's Gonna Cut You Down. The video featured a mix of musicians, actors, and cultural figures dressed in black, each paying silent tribute to Cash's legacy. When Coe appeared, standing quietly in the background, he didn't sing or speak, but his presence spoke volumes. Dressed in black with a serious expression, he looked like a man shaped by pain and years of experience. Among all the famous faces in the video, like Kanye West, Bono, and Johnny Depp, Coe's appearance felt raw and real, like a living ghost from a darker side of country music. Despite his health problems and fading reputation, Coe never stopped touring. He continued playing shows across America, mostly in small towns, biker rallies, and old honky-tonks. These weren't glamorous gigs, but they were loyal crowds. His fans didn't care about industry approval or radio hits. They came for the stories, the outlaw energy, and the rare voice that still echoed from the past. Rumors about his mental health started to spread in the late 2000s and into the 2010s. Some fans noticed that his shows were more unpredictable than ever. There were reports of slurred speech, forgotten lyrics, and confusing stage banter. At the same time, others said his performances were still passionate and still sharp, and that his voice had lost none of its strength. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Coe was aging, struggling, and fading from public view. But he was also still performing with every ounce of fight he had left. No matter what people said or thought, David Allan Coe refused to quit. He never announced retirement. He never asked for sympathy. He just kept showing up, on stage, in black, singing songs about heartbreak, prison, rebellion, and truth. He remained one of the last real outlaws, not just in music, but in how he lived. And as the final chapter approached, Coe's legacy stood on the edge, loved, hated, but impossible to ignore. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another story from the wild side of music.